Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. In today's episode, we'll sit down with Dr. Shabir Ally to hear his thoughts on the book Jesus and Muhammad, Parallel Tracks, Parallel Lives. In this volume, author F.E. Peters offers an in-depth analysis of the parallel lives of Jesus and Muhammad, peace be upon them, by drawing on the views of modern historians and the evidence of the Gospels and the Quran. Let's see what lessons and new perspectives this book brings to the table about these two phenomenal leaders. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So I'm curious, how do you pick your books to do your book reviews, and how did you pick this one?
Well, in this case, I just happened to pick this off a library shelf as I was browsing in the Toronto Public Library. Yeah, it is an interesting book. I usually go through the religion section, and not very many books on the religion of Islam often, unfortunately, in the Toronto Public Library, but this was an interesting one.
And what do we know? The title of the book is Jesus and Muhammad, Parallel Lives. So what perspective does it bring to these two prophets? Is it from an Islamic lens, or does it look at other faith perspectives as well?
It's mainly from the historical perspective. Francis Edward Peters has been known for previous writings on the religion of Islam, more so on the biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And now he puts his expertise to look at Jesus as well. And what he does with this book, Parallel Tracks, Parallel Lives, is to intertwine the two lives together. So we would see chapter after chapter, the birth narratives, birth of Jesus, birth of Muhammad, and then going all the way down to the aftermath, after they left the scene, how did their faiths proliferate.
When you mentioned he looks at it from a historical perspective, is it looking at religious scriptures and then getting history from there, or is it general history?
Well, what he does is, in a way, both things. He starts usually by giving some kind of traditional account of how Christians see Jesus and how Muslims see the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and then finally he will interject some kind of afterthought on his own, which would come from a sort of critical historical perspective.
And what is it about this book? What do you think it adds? I guess what's the new added value? Because there is a lot of research and a lot of information out there about both of these prophets.
Well, I think one of the good things about this is that it brings the two lives together, so that it creates a kind of a mutual interest between Muslims and Christians to study the two lives together. I read a review from one reader on Amazon.com who said that, okay, I only know about Jesus, so then I read the book thinking that if I can see that his information about Jesus is correct, then I would more likely trust his information about Muhammad, because that's the one I know. He knows Jesus. Well, what a book like this does is that it draws in readers who only knew about one of these prophets to read the book and find out about the other prophet as well.
Yeah.
We understand things best by comparison and contrast, so it's good to see the two compared and contrasted like this. The life of Jesus on the one hand, the life of the Prophet Muhammad on the other hand. So by showing the similarities, which are very important and should not be missed, he brings the people of the two faiths together in the one.
And how does he, I think you briefly mentioned, but in a little bit more detail, how does he structure the book to mirror parallel lives,
Well, he goes chapter after chapter. So when we look at the birth narratives, for example, he's able to say, okay, let's. This is how Christians understand the birth of Jesus, how the Muslims understand the birth of Muhammad. Now, looking at it critically, he says in an afterthought, okay, so Jesus is said to be born in Bethlehem, according to some of the Gospels. Well, he says that what else we know about Jesus discounts that fact. He wasn't born in Bethlehem. The Gospels try to show that he was a descendant of David, but that is with an apologetic purpose. The writers wanted to show that Jesus fulfills the messianic prophecy, so he is truly the Messiah, son of David. So we cannot take that as a historical fact. So this betrays his critical and historical approach to the subject. Then he brings the same kind of historical acumen to the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He says, okay, to say that Mecca was a busy trading town at the time of the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, this is not historically verifiable, and it doesn't seem likely from a historical point of view. This is his view. The birth of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the year of the elephant. He says we cannot accept that because that would place his birth at the year 570, but from history we would know that the year of the elephant was 552, before the birth of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And even the year 570 we wouldn't accept as his birth because that seems calculated back from the time that he began to receive his revelations. So Muslims wanted that to be 40 years old. Because 40 has some significance for Muslims. That shows the age of maturity. So they counted back from the year 610, when he is first said to have received the revelation, back 40 years and placed his birth at 570. But to Peter's, this is not dependable. The date of his death, however, is dependable, 632 of the Common Era, and he must have lived in Medina for the last 10 years, and that would place his migration also at a dependable date of 622. Interestingly and curiously, and I think some other historians will not agree with him on this, he gives credence to many traditional notions among Muslims about the early life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that he was born an orphan after his father had passed away, and while he was still in the womb of his mother, his father died, that he grew up in the care of his grandfather and then of his uncle Abu Talib. That he married Khadija in an arranged marriage when he was a young man, and she was the mother of all of his surviving children, all daughters. So it's very interesting to see his take on these very pertinent issues to Muslims coming from that historical perspective.
It sounds like he definitely, delves a lot into the nitty-gritty of things. Is there any criticism that you have of the book, whether it be the way it's structured or content-wise?
Content-wise, a very important caveat is that when it comes to the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, this is something F.E. Peters has studied extensively, but now he's Professor Emeritus at New York University, and it is not clear that he's up to date on all of the latest works dealing with that subject. For example, Sidney Griffith's book, The Bible in Arabic, shows that the previous kind of developing consensus that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was influenced by Jewish Christians in Arabia cannot be held dependable today, because after much search, no group has been identifiable as Jewish Christian groups in Arabia at the time. But there were other groups that Sidney Griffith identifies, which the Quran obviously was responding to, and whose beliefs the Quran was critical of. So I think some update is needed in that area. The update I felt was more so needed in what he described about the Gospels, because Peters tries to suggest that the Gospel according to Mark may have been much earlier than the present dating of 70, which is generally agreed on by modern historical scholars of the Christian documents. And more surprisingly, he tries to date the Acts of the Apostles in the Bible as being prior to the year 60, and for that reason he would place the Gospel according to Luke even earlier still. And this is way out of whack, especially given recent studies by Joseph Tyson and others who have in fact shown that Luke's Acts of the Apostles may actually date from the early part of the 2nd century. And even if that date is not accepted, then generally the Acts of the Apostles is said to be dated around the year 90 or so, towards the end of the 1st century. And the Gospel according to Luke probably about 85 to 90 of the first century, 90 CE. So it would have been fine if Peters holds those views and he's willing to support them, but he doesn't. It's a brief book to deal with the two lives together, and naturally he had to be brief, but that means that he should not be introducing controversial matters without sustaining some kind of argument to defend those arguments. And one would expect for such controversial positions that he would have footnotes referring to writings that would vindicate his position.
And there are no footnotes?
Well, there are footnotes, but very few, and none to vindicate that particular position. He has a guide to further reading in a separate section towards the end of the book, but it is not clear which readings would substantiate that point. And to me, it is a very debatable point. And in cases like this, I see that the book needs a little bit more to back up some of its claims.
What about any comments on the overall structure of the way he organized everything?
I think the organization is very nice. I really appreciate that. By placing the two lives in parallel and going stage by stage throughout the lives of the two important figures, he shows the important similarities. Each was a prophet in his own time. Each had a message that on the one hand is a message of peace, but at the same time they had something to say about the sword. Each one had followers after them who took their faith and preached it further, so that these faiths became the world religions that we know now.
And would you recommend this book to someone, I guess, who would you recommend this book to? Someone who doesn't know much about either of these prophets, or would you recommend it to someone who has some previous background?
Well, I think the book actually straddles both spheres. It speaks to the lay person who starts out with little background, and it also has information from a scholarly perspective that will be of interest to people with a more scholarly background on these two subjects.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Hey YouTube, we hope you benefited from this video. If you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, check out some of our other videos. And don't forget to subscribe so you can get new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.